Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. The night was dark and the full moon shone over the old abandoned asylum. A group of young adventurers, consisting of 6 friends, decided to explore the place. The group consisted of Tom, the brave and fearless leader, Sarah, his girlfriend, and the rest of their friends, Alex, Claire, Mark, and Emily. They entered the asylum through the back door, which was broken and hanging from its hinges. As they stepped inside, they felt a chill run down their spine. The air was cold, and the place smelled of dampness and decay. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors were littered with debris. Tom led the group down a long dark hallway, which seemed to go on forever. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from one of the rooms. It sounded like a faint whisper. They stopped to listen, but it stopped as soon as they did. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered to Tom. Tom nodded his head and signaled for the group to follow him. They cautiously approached the room from which the noise had come. As they pushed the door open, they saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a man, dressed in a dirty hospital gown, with his back to them. He appeared to be muttering to himself. The group approached him, but as they got closer, he turned around suddenly, revealing a grotesque face that looked like it had been ravaged by years of mental illness. The man let out a blood-curdling scream, and the group recoiled in terror. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching from down the hallway. They looked at each other in fear and decided to flee. As they ran down the hallway, they could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer. They could also hear screams and moans coming from the other rooms. They were being chased by the insane patients of the asylum. They reached the end of the hallway and found a door that led to the outside. They burst through the door and ran into the woods, hoping to get away from the asylum and the crazed patients. After a few minutes of running, they stopped to catch their breath. They looked back and saw that they were far away from the asylum. They sat down on a log and tried to calm themselves down. "Are we safe now?" Claire asked. "I think so," Tom replied. As they sat there, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. They looked around and saw that they were surrounded by a group of patients from the asylum. The group tried to run, but they were soon overtaken by the patients. As they were being dragged back to the asylum, Tom suddenly realized that everything that had happened that night was familiar. The patients, the asylum, the fear, everything seemed familiar. Then it hit him. He remembered being a patient at that very asylum. The fear and terror he had experienced that night had all been in his mind. It was a hallucination created by his own mind. Tom had been released from the asylum a few years ago, but the trauma had stayed with him. The group was locked up in the same room they had found the man earlier. Tom sat there in silence, realizing that he was not the fearless adventurer he thought he was. He was just another victim of the horrors of the asylum. As the sun rose, the group was released by the staff of the asylum. Tom led the group out of the building, feeling embarrassed and ashamed. He had let his past trauma get the best of him, and it had almost cost him his life. The group left the asylum, but the experience left a lasting impact on Tom. He realized that he needed to confront his past and seek professional help to overcome his trauma. As they drove away from the asylum, Tom couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. He looked back and saw that the building was different from the one he remembered. The walls were freshly painted, and the windows were intact. "Hey, guys, did you notice something strange?" Tom asked. "What do you mean?" Sarah replied. "The building, it's not the same one I remember." "It's different," Tom said. The group looked at each other in confusion. They remembered the same old, abandoned asylum that they had explored the night before. "That's impossible," Alex said. "We were just there last night." Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. Had it all been another hallucination? He looked down at his hands and saw that they were covered in dirt and debris. It couldn't have been just a figment of his imagination. As they drove away, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had faced his demons, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still off. The asylum had played tricks on his mind before, but this time, he couldn't tell what was real and what was not. Days turned into weeks, and the group tried to move on from their experience. However, strange things started to happen to them. They would hear whispers in their ears, and shadows would move in the corner of their eyes. One night, Tom woke up in a cold sweat. He sat up and saw a figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was the same man he had seen in the asylum. The man looked at him with a sinister grin, and Tom screamed in terror. The group tried to find rational explanations for what was happening, but they couldn't. They had awakened something in the asylum, and it was now haunting them. In the end, the group went their separate ways, trying to escape the horrors that they had experienced. Tom sought professional help, but the memories of the asylum haunted him for the rest of his life. Years later, Tom returned to the area where the asylum had once stood. He found an old graveyard where the patients had been buried. As he walked through the rows of headstones, he saw the same man he had seen in the asylum. The man looked at him with a grin and disappeared into thin air. Tom realized then that the asylum had been built on an ancient burial ground. The spirits of the patients had been disturbed, and they had never found peace. The asylum was no longer there, but the horrors it had unleashed still lingered on. And so, the legend of the haunted asylum was born. People would tell stories of the patients who still roamed the halls, looking for revenge. But the truth was much darker than anyone could have imagined. The asylum had been built on accursed land, and the horrors that it had unleashed could never be fully understood or explained. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.